look at that. 15-minute cities in Edmonton. And how do you taper a Ponzi scheme? And what does that mean for the Ponzi scheme? Well, tapering a Ponzi scheme, as soon as it starts to, tapering is pulling money out. As soon as people do that, usually the Ponzi scheme collapses. But what if the government was in charge of the Ponzi scheme and instead of giving you your money, they just killed you, right? Well, all of a sudden the Ponzi scheme doesn't collapse anymore, right? Because there's one entity that you can enter into an agreement with that'll kill you if you want, right? If life becomes uncomfortable enough for you, and lucky for us, the government can do that for you, right? So Jeepers Creepers, there's a lot to get to. Let's get to it. Jasper Fire, terrorism, weather modification, and lots more. So let's get to it. First, we have to start with Jeepers Creepers, robot dogs. And like, if you get a robot dog, if I got a robot dog, it wouldn't be long before I put a gun on its head. And this guy, instead of putting a gun, although maybe he also has a gun, put a flamethrower, and he does a flip and the dog does a jump, and he tells the dog to bark. And then he's freaking out because he's like, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off, because the dog starts attacking, I guess. And the flamethrower goes off. Here we go.
Do that. Oh! Bark! 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 Oh! Ah!
Okay, so, right? I mean, when you have a Terminator, like, don't be surprised if the damn thing starts trying to kill you. It's incredible. It's incredible. However, robot dogs are going to get guns on their head, and then the robot dogs are going to be blamed for all those deaths. Crusade says, I believe you need to listen to this. This is interesting to me. This is 16 minutes on the reasons behind climate change. And he starts with the Kyoto Protocol and the ozone coolant stuff that happened in the 90s. I remember all of this. I lived through all of this. And I thought to myself, it's probably nothing. They're probably over. They've probably like gotten a report back and they've lost their mind. But it was a plan. This guy says it was a plan. And it goes through, and basically they got through the Kyoto stuff on very flimsy evidence. And because of that, they were able to institute what we're living through now. And this is the end part of this. It's like just under 2 minutes, worth to listen to. He's talking here, just kind of wrapping it all up, about how they want to use climate change to bring about a one world government. And he's saying, do I think they'll be successful? Yes, but it's going to be subject to the same problems of COVID. I think this was recorded before COVID, by the way. But when COVID happened, they tried to go full authoritarian and it fell apart because they couldn't maintain their lie. They kept changing. Climate change is going to fall apart just like COVID fell apart because they can't keep lying. They can't keep using the same problem. And so the problem keeps having to move. COVID, people didn't go with them, right? The Megatron variant, this variant, that variant. Flu, people do go with them, right? There's all new flu cases. So every year we get a new variant. There's a B1, N1, whatever, avian flu. People really believe in that variant, but not the COVID variant. Anyway, I digress. This guy is talking about why they're using climate change and what the goal of climate change is, and if he thinks it's going to fall apart. I think it's going to fall apart the same way COVID did. But here, he says the same thing. Here we go.
The one thing they will never do is worry about whether it's true or not.
Climate change.
It doesn't matter how often you say to them, but this is mad, it makes no sense, there's been no global warming for 18 and a half years. I've got 12 slides which show different models over-predicting it, and some of those slides have got 50, 100 models on each slide. None of it's worked. We know that. They do not care about the facts. This has become a taboo. It's become effectively a new religion, or I would call it a superstition. The distinction between the two is that a religion is something which might or might not be true, but you can't prove it either way, whereas a superstition is something which definitely isn't true, and you can prove it, but people still adhere to it. This is a superstition, and it's eaten deeply into the governing class because it is both socially convenient, politically expedient, and above all, wickedly financially profitable. This is the largest transfer of wealth in human history from the poor to the rich, from the little guy to the big guy, from, in French terms, the sans-culotte to the cuisse de cuillard. This is an enrichment and an empowerment of the powerful governing class at the expense of the rest of us. I don't like the smell of it. And gradually, one by one, the people are waking up to this. The people have now largely seen through the global warming scam for the scam that it is. The governing class have also, interestingly, seen through it. They know now that it isn't true, but they don't care whether it's true or not. It's expedient, it's convenient, and it's profitable, and therefore, as far as they're concerned, it is so.
So there's a distinction between climate change and the political thing that is climate change. On one hand, climate change is you look outside and it's wintertime now. And then 6 months later, you're like, oh man, it's so hot out here. It's so hot, right? It's always changing. You know, every April 19th isn't 21 degrees or 17 degrees or 12 degrees, every single one, right? Some April 19ths are hot and some April 19ths are cold. And every December doesn't have snow, but a lot of them do, right? And I think without geoengineering, we'd have more snow, but I don't want to get waylaid. What I'm saying is, of course, the temperatures change. Of course, farmers' almanacs exist, trying to predict the weather. The weather has been important, droughts and all the rest of it. It's been important for all of human history because of food, right? And so the weather is something that changes. The temperatures all change, but it's in a predictable way, right? Usually in April, most of the time, it's not going to be this way. It's going to be, you know, wet and getting warmer, thawing from the cold that was just happening, and so on and so forth. And so the climate change changes like that. But the political thing that is climate change is you're bad. The things that you're doing with your technology is bad. And it's causing a potentially catastrophic thing that's going to kill you and your grandchildren. So we might as well kill you now. That's the political thing of climate change. And saying that the climate changes as a matter of course as part of our system does not satisfy the climate superstitious zealots. Okay? They want to continue to believe that climate change is something that we need to pay attention to and we also have control over, but also not enough control over unless we pay taxes or something like that. It's obviously a scam, but it's expedient, and the ruling class believe and behave as if this thing is true, and so we all have to as well. Sorry, I want to pause him. And so we all have to as well. And that's the political thing that is climate change. And in order to address that, I think we need to say very clearly, climate change, the political thing that it is meant to steal our tax dollars and control us fundamentally. And they're doing that through different means. And in ways like I did a whole piece on the hurricane and how the FEMA is not allowing aid into the hurricane zone for Hurricane Helen in North Carolina and Tennessee, et cetera, et cetera. And this is all about control. And they're using these rules. You have to get a permit. It's in a flood zone. You can't start repairs, and there's going to be fines, and there's all sorts of stuff. They're using that to even further their control on people, right? You've lost everything. Here's a loan for $750 and you can move to a 15-minute city, right? So they're using every crisis as more of a push to get what they want. And what they want is more control and centralized people in centralized 15-minute cities, not self-sufficient, dependent on government. And like that seems trite, but that seems to be what they're trying for. That seems to be the goal. And so here's Dan, and what's happening in Canada climate change wise is they're saying the Jasper Fire was a climate change fire, and it wasn't. It was a fire that made possible because of bad forestry management, because of bureaucrats who are ideologically driven to allow terrible catastrophes to happen, to say this is climate change, and then use that disaster to further their ideology and move people to where they want, big centralized 15-minute cities or worse. Dave is an MP for Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa, Shadow Minister for Rural Economic Development. He says, Jasper wildfire investigation reveals that Minister Guilbeault's department turned away multiple fire trucks and firefighters who arrived on scene to help. They were forced to watch Jasper burn because Parks Canada prevented them from doing their job. More to come. And there's lots of video, but here's some of it. This is a minute long. Gerald says, I have no words. He's the member of parliament for Yellowhead. And he says, a well-equipped firefighting team ready to protect Jasper was turned away at the gates with no clear explanation. Guilbeault's federal bureaucracy stood in the way while Jasper burned. This is beyond incompetence. It is malicious. It is evil. And people should be held accountable. But I'm still waiting for the COVID accountability bus to arrive. And I mean, Jeepers Creepers, it was supposed to be here by now. I'm telling you. Here we go.
You had said that you were not legally allowed to be there. Could you explain why you were not?
Well, that's what was explained to us by the operations section chief, the second in command to the incident commander. As far as I know, we were allowed to be there because This was through the Parks Canada liaison person and our client that made these arrangements for us to be in there. I guess there's no legislative process to allow contract firefighters be in there on behalf of other parties. Must be the reasoning for that. But we did not show up there unanticipated. This was arrangements that were made on behalf of our client Pursuit and Parks Canada before we showed up. It's not like we showed up at the door and managed to be let in like barbarians. It was our expectation that when we got to the gate that we were supposed to be ready to go in to do our job to help protect the economic engine of Jasper.
And they were not, right? And that's pretty wild stuff. So Gerald again says, I have no words. A well-equipped firefighting team ready to protect Jasper is turned away. Oh, sorry, I've already read that one. In addition to turning away firefighters, they didn't have the right connections. The trucks didn't have the right connections. And it sounds like it is on purpose that they didn't have the right connections. It sounds like somebody made that choice and it wasn't like an, oh shucks, I made an accident. Sheila Gunn Reed says, oh my goodness, listen to this testimony from Chris Leatham of Arctic Fire Safety. Parks Canada ordered hydrants for Jasper with a different thread on the side port than the thread used by all Alberta and BC municipalities. They only had 7 adapters available for hydrants. Our crews observed Petro-Canada and mobile trailer parks burned down and could not engage due to not being able to connect to hydrants. Incredible, right? And so how did that happen? How did the town get the wrong thread?
Prior to the Parks fire, Parks Canada ordered hydrants for Jasper with a different thread on the side ports than the thread used by all municipalities in Alberta and British Columbia. They only had 7 adapters which were available for hydrants to go from their thread to BAT. Our crews observed Petro-Canada and mobile trailer park burned down and could not engage due to being able to connect to hydrants. Our crew were credited by a captain with the Jasper Fire Department for saving what's left of the downtown because they were at a hydrant that did have an adapter and were able to engage impingements on buildings. No secondary water sources were staged for when the hydrants would go down. The lesson learned from past WUI events is that it's normal practice to have water supplies pre-positioned.
So there you go. It doesn't seem like an accident. Sheila Gunreed again says, this is a 4-minute video of the same gentleman's testimony. Chris Leatham of Arctic Fire Safety said he was actively obstructed from firefighting fires in Jasper, although an insurance company and resort owner hired him. He was denied entry multiple times, denied access to water supply, and told to abide by rules of engagement, which included not fighting fires. Says his team were morally deflated from not being able to help. Yeah, not surprising whatsoever, right? Here is further. After Chris Leatham testifies that Parks Canada had the wrong hydrants installed in Jasper, that he was told to watch structures burn and then warned he would be arrested if he tried to help, the Liberal chair of the Environment Committee says he can't testify because of French interpretation issues. So it's a 5-minute clip. We're not going to get there, but they do everything they can to shut down the anything that's incriminating whatsoever. Another MP, Brandon Leslie, says, shocking testimony, 50 firefighters and 20 trucks ready to battle the flames were turned away by Minister Galbo's officials on the ground. Liberal failures in Jasper continue to be exposed. Failures? Like, that's more than a failure, right? If you're standing there and you're like, listen, guys, you can't come here right now, and there's a house burning behind you, isn't that worse than a failure? Something more than a failure? Vivi says, I'm at a loss for words if people still believe this climate change crisis is not something very deliberately engineered by left-wing governments and designed to unleash as much devastation as humanly possible on our communities. Absolutely disgusting. I feel like that's the case. That's what's going on here. This is another 6-minute video of Arctic Fire Safety and what's going on there. This is just further information about the firefighters and people turned away. Blacklock's reporter says Cabinet proposed renaming inflation to heatflation so Canadians would associate high cost of living with climate change, not government policy. The idea polled badly. Yeah, shocking. But it's real. Like, they want to lie to you with every tool and opportunity they possibly can, while at the same time keeping you in the dark that they're telling firefighters in Jasper, you can't fight fires here because climate change demands that we have a sacrifice, and the sacrifice has been decided that Jasper's it, right? Previously, what was the town that burned up with the blamed on the railroad tires igniting flames and burning the whole thing down? I can't remember the name, but it wasn't Burnaby. Darn, I can't remember the name. I'm sorry. But right, it seems like this happens every so often, and it's used to justify further climate change policies, less control by Canadian citizens, more power by government, because for your safety, comrade, right? Otherwise, the environment's going to get you. I mean, come on, really? But that's what they want us to believe. Moving on, let's talk about terror and terrorism and what's going on in Canada. Yesterday was October 7th, and so every man and his dog. Justin Trudeau made speeches, Pierre Poilievre made speeches, and I don't care. I just don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I find it interesting. My question when reading this and letting you know that this is what the Canadian government spent yesterday on, my question is, does Canada have a right to defend itself from an invasion that its own government is orchestrating against it? Does Canada have a right to defend itself from its enemies, foreign and domestic? Do we? Because it doesn't seem like we do. Here's what they did yesterday, right? Mark says, text of motion passed, proposed by Melissa Lantsman and unanimously adopted by Canada's House of Parliament, that this House unequivocally reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself from the terrorists who attack it, express support for the victims of October 7th and their families and the people of Israel, call for the release of 101 hostages still being held captive, condemn the grotesque rise in anti-Semitism and hate towards Jews in Canada over the past year, and condemn Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorist entities that must be eliminated. It seems like lip service. It seems like they being the Liberals, the people in power, have told police, you have to step down, just like the firefighters in Jasper got told to step down, you have to stand down. And so it seems like we are being manipulated, we are being lied to, and it seems like the government of Canada is more interested in Israel than it is in actually governing Canada. We can't do a damn thing about Israel. We can't do a damn thing. We can't tell them to do anything unless we're willing to go and militarily occupy them. And we don't have the military to do that. So we can't do anything about it, period, one way or the other. We can't say, or Gaza or anywhere else, we can't tell them to do anything, period. And so it's null, it's moot. The only people we can govern are ourselves. And so we should shut up about other countries. We should stop sending money to fund their wars. We should stop sending weapons or any kind of anything to anybody, and we should sort out our own country first and close the borders. But this whole idea of Canada can impact the rest of the world by making agreements in the House of Commons, how arrogantly stupid. What an unbelievable narcissistic waste of time. Honestly. And it's all virtue signaling. It's nonsense. This doesn't mean anything. Nobody in Israel is saying, oh good, Canada sides with us. F off. Give me a break. It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. And they allow stuff like this. And people are saying, Amazing Polly and I were having a conversation about this. And I said, terrorists should be deported. And she said, well, it's free speech. And I was like, well, they're lighting a Canadian flag on fire and saying death to Canada. And she's like, those are just words, which doesn't sound like Amazing Polly to me, but okay, whatever. Fringe Views is the person I was talking to. I think that is Amazing Polly's account. So whatever. But it seems like words count. Like if you were in a foreign country and you were like, death to the foreign country, like I think people would probably get upset with you about that, right? Like you probably shouldn't do that. But these people are holding a rally to say death to Canada, and that seems weird. The New Westminster Times says death to Canada, death to United States, death to Israel, said a Vancouver Samadon activist at the art gallery. She praised October 7th Hamas terrorists and said to the crowd, we must do it, in an apparent call for violence. I don't think that's great. I think people calling for death to Canada and calling for people to be violent, that's not great, right? And is that free speech? I don't think so. I think that's like the definition of hate speech. And again, I'm not like, I like the idea of free speech. I've been listening to Widdowson, what's her name? Helen Widdowson? I'm getting her first name wrong, I'm sorry. Widdowson, and she struggles with this too, because she's a free speech absolutist, but then there was a conversation she got into with somebody, and they were talking, they were talking about certain things, and she got very uncomfortable with where the conversation was going. And it's like, man, I'm okay with free speech. I'm okay even expressing like, I think you're a traitor. I think that you've done bad things like to the government or to a person in the government. I think that that's okay. But I think that collectively gathering together and having like a whipped up mob calling for harming a group of people, it's probably a good idea to not let that happen, right? It's probably a good idea to not allow mobs to foment, get the pitchforks out, et cetera, et cetera. And like, are there times for that? Probably. There are probably times to get the pitchforks out. Yeah. But just as a matter of course, at this point in time in Canada, like, does this make sense to you? I don't think it makes sense to me. What's Canada going to do? And calling for death to Canada, it doesn't seem great to me. Lighting the Canadian flag on fire, which they do in another clip. Again, it seems like terrorism to me. It seems like threats to Canada. It seems like we have laws on the books that talk about this. You can't do these kind of things. And yet now that these people are doing it, it's free speech and it's a sticky situation. And I think that it's probably not a sticky situation. They're breaking a whole bunch of laws that are on the books, and right or wrong, I guess we can argue if they're right or wrong, but they are on the books. And so like, it seems strange to me to allow this kind of chaos to continue when at the same time, they're passing lip service virtue signals like this, right? Karina Gould says Alex Zoltan says an erratic looking Karina Gould encountered with press makes things perfectly clear. She explains that the government's strange line in the sand position on hate rallies, they're permitted and in some cases encouraged as long as they don't occur at daycares. So I don't know. She's rambling here. I'll let it play for a minute or until I get sick of listening to it. Here we go.
And Lanceman and Mr. Poliev said both of them made strong statements today. What did you make of them?
Look, I think today, as October 7th, is a terrible anniversary. A year ago, there was a horrific terrorist attack in Israel. 1,200 people were murdered. Over 200 were taken hostage. That is a horrific day for any nation. And today is about remembering those victims. It's about standing in solidarity with the people of Israel. It's about standing in solidarity with Canadian Jewish people who, for the past year, have experienced unbelievable anti-Semitism, who have been targeted in their places of worship,
Her government used the War Measures Act against peaceful truckers. And she's like, oh yeah, the anti-Semitism felt by Jews in Canada has been terrible. And I mean, like, it has, but I'm pretty sure that her government's been encouraging, like, getting cops to deliver coffee to the people who are making the Jews feel so uncomfortable, right? So like, it's a bit rich coming from her.
community centers. It is completely unacceptable.
But to their point of what they were suggesting, that the Liberal government is tolerating anti-Semitic chants in the streets, lawless mobs, etc. Can you speak to their points?
It is completely untrue. And we have at every turn condemned anti-Semitism. And today, Minister Barani, our Attorney General and Minister of Justice, was exceptionally clear, as we have been over the past year, that Canadians have a right to peaceful protest, but that protest must be peaceful. And that doesn't mean that you go and protest.
So when you light a Canadian flag upside down and say death to Canada, that's totally peaceful. But when you have hot tubs and bouncy castles, get the War Measures Act out. These people are insane. It's not believable. These people are not believable. They're liars who will lie to you. Here they are, lighting a Canadian flag on fire. Is this a peaceful protest? Lighting flags on fire? That's an inherent threat, right? Is that not a threat?
Palestinians don't only want your eyes on Rafah, eyes on Gaza.
So there you go. They're, I would say, not peaceful protest here, right? This isn't a peaceful protest. Even with... they had epitaphs of Stephen Harper. In the 2014-15 election, they had the opponents of the Conservatives had made a paper mache figure of Stephen Harper. They brought it to an event and then they used it as a piñata. And like, that's pretty clear messaging, right? If somebody did that now, say a trucker did that now and hung up the epitaph hung up this figure of Justin Trudeau on a crane or something like that and allowed people, $1 for 3 hits with a bat type deal. Do you think that would be allowed? I don't think it would be allowed. People would lose their minds. So like, these people are lying to you about what they're doing, and they're desperate that you believe them, despite all the evidence to the contrary of what they're saying, right? Like, they're just liars. They're just liars. Western Standard says Rustad of BC's demanding the feds revoke the visas of those who promote terrorist organizations in British Columbia. And he's using the example of, the thumbnail is using from the Western Standard is using this protest that I'm showing you there. Like, they're the same image. So I think that it's funny because like Stephen Harper proposed removing the citizenship of terrorists and that he lost an election based on that, right? In Canada, 2015. So it's interesting that Rustad is doubling, tripling down on that and making that ask of the feds. I guess BC's changed their opinion on that now. I guess. Tokyo Rose is highlighting Mel Joly. Mel Joly is using October 7th to attack Pierre Poilievre, and Pierre Poilievre needs to be attacked because he's gaslighting Canadians somehow. I'm not entirely sure. Mel Joly doesn't make much sense here. Here we go.
With Alexandre Luc's father, I was in contact with Vivian Silver's son. That's what you do when you hold a position of power in these difficult times. You support people. You show moral leadership. You don't frickin' gaslight people. Not on a day that is so important for the country. And clearly that's what Pierre Poilievre was doing today. And clearly what he was saying, he was trying to play petty politics on the backs of victims. And so that's why not only should he apologize for what he did, but clearly the guy's unfit to become prime minister because Canadians deserve way better.
What? Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. So let's talk about Ponzi schemes and let's talk about retirement and weather weapons. Why just have weather weapons when you can have economic weapons too, right? Yeah. And so we fund a lot of things with our production, and I can't fund anything if I'm dead, right? So if I get to keep some of my production, but I have to give up most of it to the government, well, they like that, but they like it even more if my savings were also theirs, right? And so in order to get me on board, and Kathleen Wynne, remember when Kathleen Wynne wanted to make it law to have to contribute to your retirement package? I think this is why. What they're trying to do is the retirement package, or government money just more broadly, but the retirement package, our retirement package is managed by the WEF, right? And so they send it to them, the WEF, and I guess they're supposed to manage it on our behalf. But what happens if you want to, in a Ponzi scheme, if you want your money back, it collapses the Ponzi scheme. Not just one person, but like if everybody wants their money back, the Ponzi scheme collapses, right? What if when you ask for your money back, and in this case, you're going to be retired, right? So you're going to be like 65, 70. You say, I'd like my money back, please. And they say, okay, also you need a surgery and a vaccine. And then you die. They get to keep all your money. They get to keep it all. They just keep it all, right? They just keep it all. If you're single, if you don't have a wife, it doesn't go to your estate. It goes to the government, right? And so this is how you taper a Ponzi scheme. You kill the people who ask for their money back. And how would you do that? MAID. Listen to this guy's 657. Amazing. I sent this to Amazing Polly this morning. I said, what do you think about this? Like this sounds very plausible. She said, this is just a guy with opinions. I'm like, okay. So you let me know what you think. Amazing Polly thinks nothing here. I think, holy shitballs, they have monetized, one, our production, and two, our retirement. Okay? So they keep me alive, me, Mark, alive, in order to take my production next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. Because without me being here, they can't take my production. But they're just greedy. They're greedy and they want more. And so they can steal more from me if they've convinced me that I'm saving for my retirement. All those retirement savings, you're not getting them back, man. Also, if I think somebody's done this where they've taken the money that they would have put into the retirement plan, the government retirement plan, and just put it into the market, and it outperforms at like 25% or something like that. Like if you would let me, somebody was suing the government, but I can't remember how that went. I think it got thrown out. But basically they were saying if I was allowed to keep that money, and if I invested that money in the way that I would invest it because I'm a smart guy, you stole $2 million from me. Basically, it would have yielded $2 million by now. And again, I think it's very plausible, but I couldn't put it all together before. But it makes perfect sense now, right? Like, oh man, your life sucks, eh? And this retirement's just not going to cut it. Let's kill you, and then I get to keep your retirement money. Here we go.
Hey, Lawrence Lepard, you cannot.
That's too fast. I'm sorry. I demand better of myself.
Taper a Ponzi scheme. Why? Because when people want their money back, it causes the house of cards to collapse.
Yes.
What if I told you that the industrial military complex figured out how to taper a Ponzi scheme with a shot? You're slowly going to...
What he said there was talking about, the Jimmy thing, right? That they forced on everybody. That's what he was talking about. How do you taper a Ponzi scheme? Because it's not a problem if one person does. It's not even really a problem if 10 people do or 100 people do, right? It's a problem when more ask than they have money to reconcile. And then the whole thing falls apart. So not everybody's going to do what they're told, but enough will that they'll die. And the Ponzi scheme doesn't collapse because enough people have died that there's enough money to cover. I mean, by now, probably quite a lot of people asking for their money back. But that's only been made possible because when people hit that age, right? Evil.
To take people out who complied. So you don't have to pay them back, bro. And guess what? Why does it make sense? What do you know about U.S. tax law? When people die that have a lot of money in a Roth or an IRA, don't they have to pay estate tax, 55%? So who's getting the gravy? The government's getting that money back, bro. So guess what? Do you understand now why we started this podcast with Susan and the turbo cancer? And yet I took you back 50 years and showed it to you in Jack Rubenstein. And what's happening now that...
So he basically goes through, this is a 6-minute video, right? So at the beginning of this, he talks about the inception, Ronald Reagan, I think it was Reagan, maybe it was Jimmy Carter, who brought in the Roth IRAs and investing in their retirements and things like that. This big pile of money that's not audited, that's the big pile of money that they're stealing. And they're going to steal it from Canada too. It's the same thing. We're doing the same thing.
Listen, y'all not gonna like this one today. And
Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful